My sister told me they did not have time for my pointless little award ceremony because her husband was taking them to a five-star dinner. She typed that message while sitting in a house she did not know I owned. She ate a dinner she did not know I paid for. And 3 hours later, she choked on her vintage wine when my face appeared on all 20 screens of the restaurant she was sitting in. But before I tell you how I silenced my entire family without speaking a single word to them, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been the black sheep who turned out to be the wolf. I stood in the center of my studio apartment in downtown Atlanta. The air conditioner rattled in the window frame, and the paint was peeling slightly in the corner near the ceiling. To anyone looking in from the outside, this room belonged to Valerie, the struggling music teacher. But the dress hanging on the back of my door told a different story. It was a custom gold silk gown hand-stitched in Paris and flown in this morning. The fabric shimmered in the dim light, looking like liquid metal. It cost more than what my father made in a year. I ran my fingers over the cool material, feeling the heavy contrast between my two lives. For 5 years I had been living as a ghost. To the world I was Valerie Johnson, the quiet woman who taught piano to neighborhood kids and drove a 10-year-old Honda. But to the music industry, I was the pen. The faceless, nameless songwriter who had written 5 number 1 hits on the Billboard charts in the last 12 months alone. Tonight was the night the ghost would finally become real. The National Songwriters Association had named me Songwriter of the Year. It was the highest honor in our industry. For the first time, I was going to walk onto a stage and claim my work. I picked up my phone. My heart hammered against my ribs, not out of stage fright, but out of a foolish, lingering hope. I opened the group chat named Family Love. It had been dormant for weeks. I typed slowly, "Hey everyone, I know this is last minute, but I was nominated for an award tonight. It is a really big deal for me. I have 4 VIP tickets. Would you, Mom, Dad, and Spencer like to come?" I stared at the screen. 1 minute passed, then 2. 3 bubbling dots appeared. I held my breath. A message from Candace popped up. A laughing emoji followed by text that felt like a slap across the face. "Oh, Valerie, seriously. We do not have time for your pointless little school awards. Spencer is taking us to Le Mans tonight to celebrate his big new deal. We are going to eat real food, not sit in a high school auditorium." My stomach twisted. Le Mans was the most expensive French restaurant in the city, a place you had to book 6 months in advance. Then my mother Bernice chimed in. "Do not be dramatic, Valerie. We are very proud of your little piano lessons, but Spencer is closing a major contract for Onyx Records. We need to support the person who is actually bringing success to this family. Do not blame us for having standards." I waited for my father to say something, to say that he wanted to see his daughter, to say that my work mattered. A notification buzzed. Harold liked Candace's message. That was it, the final severing of the cord. I did not cry. I think I had cried enough tears over them to fill the Atlantic Ocean. A cold calm settled over me. It was a feeling I had never felt before. It was the absence of expectation. I typed back 2 words. "That is fine." I put the phone down on the scratched laminate counter. I stepped into the gold dress. It fit like a second skin. I looked in the mirror, and for the first time in my life, I did not see the disappointing daughter. I saw a queen, but I was not ready to reveal her just yet. I reached into my closet and pulled out my old, oversized beige trench coat. The wool was pilling, and it had a coffee stain on the hem. I buttoned it all the way up to my chin, completely hiding the gold silk underneath. I slipped into my worn-out sneakers, carrying my Louboutin heels in a tote bag. When I walked out of my apartment building, the Uber driver did not look twice at me. He just saw another tired woman in Atlanta trying to get by. He had no idea he was driving the woman who wrote the song playing on his radio right now. 5 miles away in the gated community of Buckhead, my sister Candace was living a lie wrapped in stucco and marble. Her house was massive, a 6-bedroom estate with a fountain in the driveway and a grand double staircase in the foyer. She told everyone on Instagram that Spencer bought it with his bonus checks. She did not know that Spencer was 3 months behind on the rent-to-own agreement. And she certainly did not know that the holding company that owned the deed was called VJ Properties. VJ Valerie Johnson. Inside the master bedroom, Candace was sitting in front of a ring light streaming to her 50,000 followers. She was applying a layer of foundation that cost $80. Hey guys, so excited for tonight. My husband Spencer, you know the top executive at Onyx Records, is taking us to Le Monde. We are celebrating life and success. She paused to read a comment. Someone asked about her sister. Candace rolled her eyes and let out a short, cruel laugh. Oh, Valerie. Yeah, she is sweet, but she is a bit lost. She thinks being a music teacher is a career. I invited her to dinner, but she said she had some awards ceremony to go to, probably getting a certificate for attendance or something. We tried to help her, but you cannot help people who do not want to be elevated. Downstairs in the kitchen, Spencer was screaming. He was a tall white man with thinning hair and a suit that was too tight around the shoulders. He liked to think he was the king of Atlanta's music scene, but in reality, he was a mid-level A&R manager who had not signed a hit artist in 2 years. He was taking his frustration out on the housekeeper. Look at this shirt. I said heavy starch. Do you not understand English? I have to meet the CEO of Onyx tonight. If I look like a slob, it is on you. He threw the shirt on the floor. My parents, Harold and Bernice, walked through the front door beaming with pride. They treated this house like a shrine. My father shook Spencer's hand with a deference that made me sick. Looking sharp, son. You are the man of the hour. We are just honored to be seen with you. Spencer adjusted his tie, looking at himself in the hallway mirror. Thanks, Harold. Tonight is the night. I have a lead on the pen. You know that mystery songwriter everyone is talking about? The one who wrote the new track for Beyoncé. My sources say he is going to be at the awards tonight. If I can sign him, I get the VP chair. And then he gestured grandly to the house that I owned. I will buy this place cash. My mother clasped her hands together. Oh, Spencer, you are so brilliant. Thank God Candace found you. Can you imagine if she had ended up like Valerie? Struggling to pay rent and chasing silly dreams. Candace walked down the stairs in a red velvet dress, looking like a movie star. She kissed Spencer on the cheek. Don't talk about Valerie. It ruins the vibe. Tonight is about us. About winners. Spencer checked his Rolex. A fake one he bought in Chinatown last year. Let's go. The reservation is at 7, and I want the best table. I want everyone at Le Monde to know that the new royalty of the music business has arrived. They piled into a rented Escalade, leaving the lights on in the house. They were loud, they were confident, they were completely unaware that they were driving straight into a hurricane. As their car pulled away, I was stepping out of my Uber at the back entrance of the convention center. I took off the trench coat and handed it to a confused security guard. Can you trash this for me? I asked. He looked at the coat, then he looked at me. The gold dress caught the light of the street lamps, and for a second, he looked like he had seen an angel. Yes, ma'am, he whispered. I took a deep breath. The air smelled like rain and victory. It was time to go to work. I walked exactly 2 blocks away from my apartment building. I kept my head down and pulled the collar of the beige trench coat up high to cover my face. I had to make sure none of my neighbors saw what was about to happen. I turned the corner onto a quiet side street where the streetlights were dim. Waiting there was a phantom black Rolls-Royce Ghost. The engine was purring so quietly it was almost silent. The driver, a large man named James who had been with me since my first royalty check cleared, stepped out and opened the rear door. Good evening, Ms. Johnson, James said with a respectful nod. You look ready for war tonight. I smiled and finally let the trench coat slide off my shoulders. I tossed it onto the passenger seat like a shed skin. I slid into the back seat. The interior smelled of rich mahogany and expensive leather. It was the smell of success. As the car pulled away from the curb, gliding over the potholes that usually rattled the suspension of my old Honda, I felt the transformation take hold. The poor piano teacher was gone. The woman sitting in this car was the pen. I pulled out my phone, but this time I did not check the family group chat. I opened my encrypted business email. A message from my entertainment lawyer Marcus sat at the top of the inbox. The subject line read simply, "Bidding War Update." I tapped it open. My eyes scanned the numbers. Universal had just countered Sony's offer for my publishing catalog. The new number on the table was $2.5 million, and they were offering a signing bonus if I revealed my identity tonight. 2.5 million. I looked out the window at the Atlanta skyline passing by. The city lights blurred into streaks of gold matching the fabric of my dress. I was sitting on a lottery ticket that I had earned with blood, sweat, and ink. I took a deep breath, inhaling the cool air conditioning. I was calm. I was powerful. I was ready. At that exact same moment, 3 miles west of where I was, my family was piling into a rented black SUV. It was a massive vehicle unnecessary for 4 people, but Spencer insisted on it because he thought it made him look like a hip-hop mogul. The car smelled of industrial-strength air freshener and Spencer's overpowering cologne. Spencer was in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel with one hand and gesturing wildly with the other. He was in full performance mode. My sister Candace sat in the passenger seat, frantically checking her reflection in the visor mirror, making sure her contour was visible in the dim light. My parents, Harold and Bernice, sat in the back, leaning forward eagerly, hanging on every word that fell from Spencer's mouth. "You guys do not understand how huge tonight is," Spencer said, his voice booming in the enclosed space. "I have been tracking the pen for 6 months. My sources at the agency tell me he is going to be there tonight. I am going to corner him before the ceremony even starts." My father, Harold, nodded solemnly. "You have always had a nose for talent, Spencer. That is why you are the director." "So who do you think he is?" Spencer laughed, a loud, arrogant sound that bounced off the windows. "Oh, I have a profile. I have analyzed the lyrics of those 5 number 1 hits, the depth, the aggression, the complexity of the chord structures. Listen to me, Harold. The pen is definitely a man. Probably a guy in his late 40s or early 50s. An old soul. Someone who has lived a hard life on the streets." My mother, Bernice, chimed in. "That makes sense. The music is so powerful." "Exactly," Spencer interrupted, cutting her off. "A woman could not write like that. I mean, no offense, ladies, but women writers usually stick to breakups and feelings. They write diary entries. The pen writes anthems. There is a masculine energy in those tracks that you just cannot fake. It is raw. It is intellectual. I bet he is some reclusive genius who sits in a dark room smoking cigars and drinking whiskey. And tonight, I am going to buy him that whiskey." Candace giggled, snapping a selfie with the passing streetlights. "You are so smart, baby. Imagine if he signs with you. We will be the power couple of Atlanta." Spencer smirked, checking his watch. "When I sign him, Candace, we are not just going to be a power couple. We are going to be legends. I will get that vice president office. We will buy the house for real, and we will finally stop pretending to be rich and actually be rich." My father patted Spencer on the shoulder from the back seat. "We are rooting for you, son. You are the only one in this family with real ambition. Thank God we have you to steer the ship. Unlike some people who settle for teaching Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star to toddlers." The car erupted in laughter. They laughed at me. They laughed at my small life. They laughed at the idea that a woman could possess the genius that Spencer so desperately admired. They drove through the city fueled by delusion and a rented gas tank, heading toward the same destination as me. My Rolls-Royce turned onto the main avenue leading to the award venue. I saw the searchlights cutting through the night sky. I saw the red carpet stretching out like a tongue of fire. I saw the crowds of fans screaming behind the barricades. My phone buzzed again. It was a text from Marcus. "The CEO of Onyx Records is sitting at table 1. He is expecting to meet the pen. He has no idea it is you. Have fun." I locked my phone screen. The screen went black, reflecting my face. I did not look like a man in his 50s. I did not look like someone who smoked cigars. I looked like Valerie Johnson, and I was about to teach my brother-in-law a very public lesson about what feminine energy can actually do. The driver slowed down as we approached the VIP drop-off. "Ready, Ms. Johnson?" James asked. I smoothed the silk of my gold dress. I thought about Spencer's voice claiming that I was incapable of depth. I thought about my mother's text telling me not to blame them. I thought about the dinner they were about to eat, paid for by the credit card I was about to cancel. I am more than ready, James. Let's go make some history. As my car glided to a stop at the VIP entrance, Spencer's rented SUV was getting stuck in traffic 3 blocks away, honking aggressively at a pedestrian. He was rushing to find a phantom man he had invented in his head. I was stepping out onto the pavement to claim the crown he thought belonged to him. The distance between our cars was only a few miles, but the distance between our realities was infinite, and the crash was inevitable. The heavy oak doors of Le Monde swung open, and my family walked in as if they owned the building. The air inside smelled of white truffles and old money. It was the kind of place where the lighting was dim enough to hide secrets, but bright enough to catch the sparkle of real diamonds. Spencer led the pack. He adjusted his suit jacket and walked straight past the queue of people waiting for tables. He did not look at them. To him, they were just background noise in the movie of his life. He approached the hostess stand. The hostess was a young black woman named Tiana. She was beautiful and poised, with her hair in neat braids and a tablet in her hand. She looked up with a polite, professional smile. "Good evening, sir. Do you have a reservation with us tonight?" she asked. Spencer did not smile back. He leaned one arm on the podium, invading her personal space just enough to be intimidating. "I do not need a reservation for a Tuesday night, sweetheart. I am Spencer Davis, the A&R director at Onyx Records. I need your best table, the one in the VIP alcove near the fireplace. We are celebrating a merger that is going to change the industry, so I expect privacy and top-tier service." Tiana looked down at her tablet. Her expression did not waver, but her fingers moved quickly across the screen. "I apologize, Mr. Davis, but we are fully booked this evening. The VIP alcove has been reserved for a private viewing party of the National Songwriter Awards." Spencer let out a loud scoff that turned heads in the lobby. He turned to my father, Harold, and rolled his eyes. "You see this, Harold? This is what happens when you let interns run the front of house." He turned back to Tiana, and his voice dropped an octave, becoming dangerously quiet. "Listen to me very carefully. I spend more money on wine in one night than you make in a month. Go tell your manager that the future of Onyx Records is standing in his lobby, and he is getting thirsty. I am not sitting in the main dining room with the tourists. I want the alcove." Tiana took a deep breath. She maintained her composure in the face of his blatant disrespect. "Sir, the manager is actually in the VIP alcove right now, setting up for the event. The entire section was bought out weeks ago by the record labels. I physically cannot seat you there. I can offer you a booth in the main atrium, or I can add you to the wait list, which is currently 45 minutes. My mother Bernice stepped forward, clutching her purse. "This is outrageous. Do you know who my son-in-law is? We drove all the way from Buckhead. We are not waiting in line." Spencer held up a hand to silence my mother. "Fine." He snapped at Tiana. "We will take the booth in the atrium. But mark my words, I will be having a conversation with the owner about your attitude tomorrow morning. You clearly do not know how to treat high-value clientele." Tiana simply nodded and grabbed 4 menus. "Right this way, sir," she said, turning her back to lead them. Spencer turned to my family and whispered loud enough for Tiana to hear. "I actually prefer the atrium anyway. The lighting is better for photos. I just wanted to test her competence." She failed. They were led to a circular booth in the center of the room. It was a good table, but it was definitely not VIP. It was exposed and noisy. Spencer sat down facing the room so he could be seen. Candace slid in next to him, immediately pulling out her phone to check the lighting. My parents sat opposite them, looking around with wide eyes soaking in the atmosphere of wealth they so desperately wanted to be part of. A sommelier appeared at their table almost instantly. He was a tall, thin man with a silver tasting cup around his neck. "Good evening. Would you like to see the wine list?" Spencer waved the list away without looking at it. "No need. Bring us a bottle of your 1998 Chateau Margaux, and make sure it has been breathing for at least 30 minutes. I do not want to taste cork." The sommelier raised an eyebrow slightly. "An excellent choice, sir. That is $4,500. Shall I bring the bottle for inspection?" Spencer's eye twitched. For a split second, the mask slipped. $4,000 was more than his mortgage payment. It was money he did not have on his maxed-out credit cards. But my father was watching him. My mother was watching him. He could not back down now. "Bring 2 bottles," Spencer said, his voice cracking slightly before he cleared his throat. "We are celebrating tonight. Money is no object when you are at the top." My father Harold clapped his hands together. "That is what I like to hear. You are a generous man, Spencer. A true provider." My mother Bernice leaned back into the plush velvet seat and sighed happily. She looked around at the other diners judging their clothes and their jewelry. Then she looked at the empty fourth seat at their table. The seat where I should have been. "You know," she said, leaning in conspiratorially, "it really is a blessing that Valerie did not come. Can you imagine her sitting here in those rags she wears? She would have stuck out like a sore thumb." Candace laughed, picking up her linen napkin. "Oh my God, Mom, you are so right. She would have probably ordered chicken fingers or asked for ketchup." Valerie just does not understand this world. She thinks culture is playing classical music in a dusty classroom. She has no idea what real luxury feels like. Spencer swirled his water glass, looking important. "It is not just the clothes, it is the mindset. Valerie has a poverty mindset. That is why she is stuck. That is why she is single. Men want a woman who fits into a place like this, a woman like Candace, not someone who looks like she just finished shift work at a library." My father nodded in agreement, taking a piece of bread from the basket. "We tried to raise her better. We gave her the same opportunities as Candace. But some people just do not have that spark. They are destined to be ordinary." Candace smirked and opened her Instagram camera. She panned the camera around the restaurant and then focused on her own face. "Hey guys, we just sat down at Le Monde, about to order some vintage wine. So sad my sister could not make it, but honestly, the vibe is so much better without the negativity. Swipe up to see my outfit details." They sat there in their bubble of arrogance, insulated by debt and delusion. They insulted the staff. They mocked the other patrons. And they tore my character apart piece by piece. They had no idea that the very reason they could not get the VIP table was because the entire industry was gathering to honor the daughter they were busy trash-talking. They had no idea that the waiters whispering in the corner were not talking about Spencer's suit, but were talking about the live broadcast that was about to start on the giant screens hidden behind the velvet curtains. They thought they were the main characters of the night. But the opening credits were just finishing, and the plot twist was about to hit them with the force of a freight train. The wine arrived, and Spencer made a show of tasting it, swirling the red liquid around his mouth and nodding approvingly, even though he could not tell the difference between this and a $20 bottle from the grocery store. He raised his glass. "To family," he lied, "to the ones who matter." They clinked their glasses. The crystal rang out with a hollow sound. And then the lights in the restaurant began to dim. The Rolls-Royce came to a gentle stop at the very edge of the red carpet. Through the tinted windows, I could see a chaotic sea of flashing lights and screaming fans. It looked like a different planet compared to the quiet, lonely apartment I had left just 30 minutes ago. My driver James turned around in his seat and gave me a nod that was both a question and a reassurance. He was asking if I was ready to let the world in. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the recycled air of the luxury car one last time. I reached up and undid the top button of the beige trench coat, then the second, then the third. I let the old heavy wool slide off my shoulders and pool onto the leather seat behind me. For a moment, I sat there in the gold dress, feeling the cool silk against my skin. I looked down at my hands. These were the same hands that washed dishes in a tiny sink. These were the same hands that graded elementary school music quizzes with a red pen. But tonight they looked different. They looked like the hands of a creator. I reached for the door handle. James opened the door from the outside and the noise of the world rushed in. It was a deafening roar of voices and music and camera shutters. I stepped out. One foot in a Louboutin heel hit the plush crimson carpet. Then the other. I stood to my full height and lifted my chin. The reaction was instantaneous. For a split second, there was a confused hush among the photographers. They were expecting a rapper or a pop star or a famous producer. They did not know who the tall woman in the liquid gold dress was, but they knew beauty and they knew power when they saw it. One camera flashed, then 10, then 100. The world turned into a strobe light of blinding white explosions. Who is she? Look at that dress. Is that the mystery nominee? The whispers rippled through the press line. I began to walk. I did not walk like a schoolteacher. I walked with the rhythm of the bass lines I wrote in my head. I glided past the velvet ropes, ignoring the reporters thrusting microphones in my face asking for a name. Not yet. They would know my name soon enough. Ahead of me, the crowd parted. A woman with honey blonde hair and a train of white chiffon was posing for pictures. It was Sienna, the biggest R&B singer on the planet. The woman whose poster hung in my niece's bedroom. The woman whose latest platinum single I had written on a napkin in a coffee shop 3 months ago. Sienna finished her pose and turned to walk inside. Her eyes scanned the carpet and landed on me. She stopped. Her security team tried to usher her forward, but she held up a hand to stop them. She narrowed her eyes, looking at me with a spark of recognition. She had never seen my face, but she knew my energy. We had spoken on the phone once through voice modulators when I sold her the track. She walked past the screaming fans and came straight up to me. Up close, she was even more stunning than on the magazine covers. She leaned in close, ignoring the cameras that were going wild, capturing this interaction. "You are her, aren't you?" Sienna whispered. "You are the pen." I smiled simply and nodded once. Sienna let out a breath and did something that made the crowd gasp. She bowed her head slightly. Just an inch. A gesture of supreme respect from a queen to a kingmaker. "Thank you," she said softly. "That bridge you wrote saved my career. You look like a goddess tonight. Go inside and take what is yours." She squeezed my hand and walked away, leaving me stunned but emboldened. If the biggest star in the world bowed to me, then my family's opinion truly meant nothing. I was not the black sheep, I was the shepherd. I reached the top of the stairs and entered the grand foyer of the theater. It was a sanctuary of gold leaf and crystal chandeliers. Waiters circulated with trays of champagne. Industry titans were shaking hands and making deals. Standing near a massive ice sculpture was a man I recognized instantly from the photos in Spencer's home office. It was Marcus Sterling, the CEO of Onyx Records. He was an older man with silver hair and a tuxedo that fit him perfectly. He was the man Spencer claimed to be meeting tonight. The man Spencer claimed was his close friend and mentor. Marcus was looking at his phone with a frown, looking annoyed. He was likely reading another desperate text from Spencer. I decided to test the waters. I walked directly into his line of sight. Marcus looked up. His annoyance vanished instantly, replaced by a look of intrigue. He pocketed his phone and straightened his jacket. He did not know my name, but he knew I was someone important. He stepped forward, extending a hand. "Good evening. I do not believe we have had the pleasure." "I am Marcus Sterling." I took his hand. His grip was firm and respectful. "I am Valerie Johnson, but tonight most people know me by my pen name." Marcus's eyes widened. He realized who I was. The nominee. The ghost everyone wanted to sign. The pen. His demeanor shifted from polite to reverent. He placed his other hand over mine. Ms. Johnson, it is an absolute honor. I have been trying to get a meeting with your representation for 6 months. Your work is revolutionizing the sound of this city. Thank you, Mr. Sterling, I said, keeping my voice smooth and calm. I have heard a lot about Onyx Records. Marcus beamed. We would love to have you. We treat our artists like family. I tilted my head slightly, pretending to think. Family is a strong word, Mr. Sterling. Actually, I believe I have a connection to your company already. Marcus looked eager. Really? Who? I will give them a promotion immediately. I took a sip of champagne from a passing tray and looked him dead in the eye. My brother-in-law works for you. His name is Spencer Davis. The smile dropped from Marcus's face so fast it was almost comical. The warmth in his eyes was replaced by a cold, hard look of disdain. He actually flinched at the name. Spencer. Marcus repeated the name like it left a bad taste in his mouth. He let out a short, bitter laugh. You are joking. Spencer Davis is your brother-in-law. I am afraid so, I said. He speaks very highly of you. He says he is your right-hand man, that he is on the verge of a massive promotion. Marcus shook his head, looking genuinely embarrassed. Ms. Johnson, I will be honest with you, because I respect your talent. Spencer Davis is a glorified errand boy. He has not signed a profitable artist in 2 years. He is arrogant, lazy, and frankly, he is on the chopping block. I was actually planning to fire him next week if he did not produce a miracle. I felt a dark satisfaction coil in my stomach. It was exactly as I suspected. Spencer was a fraud, a small man casting a big shadow. I see, I said, keeping my face neutral. That is interesting. He told my family tonight that he was meeting you for dinner at Le Monde to finalize a deal. Marcus scoffed. Dinner. I would not eat a sandwich with that man. I am here, at the biggest night of the year. If he is at a restaurant pretending to meet me, then he is even more delusional than I thought. He looked at me with concern. I hope his lack of professionalism does not reflect on how you view Onyx Records. I smiled a smile that did not reach my eyes. Oh, do not worry, Mr. Sterling. I keep my business and my family very separate. In fact, Spencer does not even know I am the pen. He thinks I am just a schoolteacher. Marcus stared at me for a moment, and then a slow grin spread across his face. He began to laugh. A deep, genuine belly laugh. Oh, that is rich. That is poetic. The fool is chasing a ghost across town, while the real treasure is standing right in front of his boss, Ms. Johnson. You are full of surprises. The lights in the foyer dimmed, signaling that the show was about to start. Shall we take our seats? Marcus offered his arm to me. I believe you have a trophy to collect, and I have a very interesting phone call to make to my HR department in the morning. I took his arm. Actually, Mr. Sterling, I said as we walked toward the double doors, I think you might want to make that phone call a little sooner than tomorrow morning. Maybe in about an hour, right after I accept my award. Marcus looked at me, understanding the game immediately. I think that can be arranged. We walked into the theater together, the CEO of the company Spencer worshipped, and the sister-in-law he despised. As I walked down the aisle toward the front row, I felt the vibration of my phone in my clutch. It was probably another text from Candace or a call from my mother asking why I wasn't replying. I did not check it. I sat down in the center seat of the front row, the best seat in the house. I looked up at the stage where the golden gramophone trophy stood under the spotlight. It was waiting for me. And in a restaurant across town, a bomb was about to explode. The atmosphere in the main atrium of Le Monde was growing louder by the minute. The acoustics of the high glass ceiling meant that the sound of silverware clinking and dozens of conversations bounced around, creating a cacophony that irritated Spencer. He sat in the booth, drumming his fingers on the white tablecloth, waiting for the vintage wine he had ordered with such arrogance. A shadow fell over the table. It was not the sommelier with the silver tasting cup. It was a young waiter named Darius. Darius looked nervous, holding a small leather folder in his hands. He cleared his throat politely. "Excuse me, Mr. Davis." Spencer stopped drumming his fingers and looked up slowly. "Where is my wine? I ordered it 10 minutes ago." Darius shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "Yes, sir. The sommelier is preparing the decanter now. However, there seems to be a slight issue with the payment method you provided." The table went deadly silent. My mother Bernice froze with her hand halfway to the breadbasket. My father Harold frowned, confusing clouding his face. Spencer let out a short, incredulous laugh. "An issue? What kind of issue?" "That is a corporate platinum card. It has a limit higher than your annual salary." Darius kept his voice low, trying to be discreet to save Spencer from embarrassment. "I understand, sir. But the system declined the authorization charge for the vintage bottles. It might be a security flag or a daily limit. Do you have another card we could use just to secure the order?" Spencer's face turned a shade of crimson that matched the velvet upholstery. He snatched the black card from the folder and stood up, looming over the waiter. "This is ridiculous. There is nothing wrong with this card. Your machine is obviously broken. Or maybe you just do not know how to run a high-level transaction." He thrust the card back into Darius's chest. "Go run it again. And this time make sure you type the numbers in correctly. Do not come back here until that wine is on this table." Darius took a step back, his jaw tightening. He was being insulted, but he kept his professional mask on. "I will try again, sir. But if it declines again, we will need an alternative form of payment." Spencer waved a hand dismissively, shooing him away like a fly. "Just do your job. God, it is so hard to find competent help these days." He sat back down, adjusting his jacket and looking at my parents. "Sorry about that. These systems glitch all the time when you are moving large amounts of money. The bank probably thinks someone stole the card because I am spending so much. It is actually a security feature for people with my level of wealth." My father Harold nodded eagerly, accepting the lie. "Of course, son. I remember back in the day when I bought my first house. The bank froze my account because the down payment was so big. They just aren't used to seeing us succeed." Harold chuckled, ready to launch into one of his favorite stories. "It was 1985 and I walked into that loan office with my head held high. The loan officer looked at me and said, 'Harold, are you sure you can afford this?' And I told him, 'Listen here, sir.'" Spencer cut him off abruptly without even looking at him. "Harold, please. We are trying to have a nice dinner. We do not need to hear the loan officer story again. That was a $50,000 house. We are dealing with millions now. The stakes are a little different." My father's mouth snapped shut. The light in his eyes dimmed. He had been silenced in front of his wife and daughter, but he said nothing. He just picked up his water glass and took a sip, trying to hide his humiliation. My mother patted his arm, but her eyes were fixed on Spencer, beaming with admiration for his rudeness, which she mistook for authority. Just then, 3 waiters appeared carrying large silver trays. The food had arrived. There were platters of oysters, towers of seafood, and steaks that were still sizzling on hot stones. The smell was intoxicating. My mother reached for a fork, her hunger overtaking her manners. "Oh my goodness, this looks divine! I am starving!" "Stop!" Candace shrieked. Her voice was so shrill that diners at the next table turned to stare. "Do not touch anything, Mom." Candace stood up. She pulled a portable ring light out of her purse and clipped it onto her phone. She began rearranging the table. She moved the candle closer to the oysters. She twisted the steak plate so the grill marks caught the light. She signaled for Spencer to lean back out of the frame. "We have to get the perfect shot for the feed," Candace said, her eyes glued to her screen. "Everyone wait. Nobody eat yet." For 10 agonizing minutes, my family sat in front of hundreds of dollars of cooling food. The steak stopped sizzling. The condensation on the seafood tower began to drip onto the tablecloth. My father's stomach growled audibly, but he did not dare reach for a shrimp until Candace gave the signal. "Okay, got it," Candace finally said, sitting back down and beginning to edit the photo immediately. "You guys can eat now." Spencer cut into his steak aggressively. Finally, he took a bite and chewed thoughtfully. It is a little overcooked, but I guess that is what you get when you are not in the VIP section. My mother swallowed a raw oyster and wiped her mouth daintily. It is delicious, Spencer. Thank you so much for treating us. It really is a shame Valerie isn't here to taste this. Although knowing her, she would probably complain that it is too fancy. Spencer laughed, his mouth full of meat. Valerie would not know a good steak if it hit her in the face. She is probably at home right now, heating up a frozen dinner in that microwave she has had since college. Candace looked up from her phone where she was writing a caption about blessed life. You know, I honestly feel bad for her. She is 32 years old, and what does she have to show for it? No husband, no house, just a classroom full of snotty kids and a closet full of cardigans. My mother sighed, shaking her head. I tell her all the time. Valerie, you need to find a man. You cannot live on a teacher's salary forever. You need someone to take care of you, someone stable, like Spencer. Spencer puffed out his chest. Well, not everyone can land a guy like me, Bernice, but she could at least try. I tried to set her up with one of the interns at the label last month. Nice kid. Makes about 30 grand a year. Perfect for her. But she turned her nose up at him. Said she was too busy with her projects. Projects? Candace snorted. You mean scribbling songs in her journal that nobody will ever hear? It is delusional. She needs to wake up and realize that the clock is ticking. If she does not marry soon, she is going to be alone forever. And I am not going to have her crashing on my couch when she retires broke. My father Harold finally spoke up, his voice quiet. She does work hard, though. You have to give her that. She has never asked us for a dime. Spencer pointed his steak knife at my father. That is because she has no ambition, Harold. It is easy not to ask for money when you are content with being a nobody. But in this world, you have to be a shark. You have to take what you want. Valerie is a goldfish. They all laughed, a cruel, unified sound that bound them together in their shared superiority. They ate my food. They drank the wine that I would soon refuse to pay for. And they dissected my life with surgical precision. Little did they know that 5 miles away, the goldfish they were mocking was currently standing on a stage holding a solid gold trophy that weighed more than their collective integrity. And the shark, sitting at the head of the table, was about to find out that he was swimming in waters far too deep for him to survive. The waiter Darius watched them from the shadows, his face unreadable. He knew something they did not. He knew that the card machine wasn't broken. He knew that the decline message on the screen had said 2 words that would end Spencer's night. Stolen card. But Darius decided to wait. He decided to let them finish their meal. After all, the manager had just received a very interesting phone call from the corporate office, and the police were already on their way. The ambient jazz music that had been floating through the dining room of Le Monde suddenly cut out. For a brief second there was silence, and then the lights in the main atrium began to dim. It was not the romantic lowering of lights for dinner service. It was a dramatic, theatrical darkening that plunged the tables into near obscurity, leaving only the small flickering candles to illuminate the faces of the confused diners. At the far end of the room, a heavy velvet curtain that I had noticed earlier began to part. A massive projection screen descended from the ceiling. It was enormous, easily 100 inches wide, and it dominated the space. The sound system crackled to life, and the booming voice of a television announcer filled the restaurant, replacing the gentle clinking of silverware. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 55th Annual National Songwriter Awards, broadcasting live from the Fox Theater. My sister Candace let out a loud groan of frustration. She dropped her phone onto the tablecloth with a clatter. Are you kidding me? I was right in the middle of recording a story for my followers. Now the lighting is ruined. Look at this. I look like I'm sitting in a cave. She turned to Spencer, pouting. Babe, do something. Tell them to turn it back on. I need to post this toast before the wine gets warm. My engagement rates drop if I do not post between 7 and 8. Spencer wiped his mouth with his napkin and threw it down. He was already agitated from the credit card incident, and this was the last straw. He signaled for the manager, snapping his fingers in the air as if he were calling a dog. A man in a sharp tuxedo appeared. He was the general manager, a man named Henri, who carried himself with an air of absolute authority that Spencer could only dream of possessing. "Yes, Monsieur Davis, is there a problem?" Henri asked, his face impassive. "Yes, there is a problem," Spencer hissed, gesturing at the giant screen. "We are trying to have a 5-star dining experience here. I did not pay $4,000 for wine to sit in a sports bar. Turn that thing off immediately. My wife is trying to create content, and this noise is unacceptable." Henri did not even glance at the screen. "I am afraid that is impossible, monsieur. Tonight is the biggest night in the music industry. Le Monde has been selected as the official viewing venue for the overflow of executive guests. The VIPs in the private alcove specifically requested the live feed. And as this is a national event of cultural significance, we oblige our most distinguished guests." Spencer's face tightened. "Distinguished guests? Do you know who I am? I am a director at Onyx Records. I should be the one deciding what is on that screen." Henri smiled a smile that was polite, but cut like a knife. "If you are with Onyx Records, monsieur, then surely you would want to see the results of the awards. Your CEO, Mr. Sterling, is actually in attendance at the theater. We would not want you to miss his potential victory. Now please enjoy the show." Henri walked away before Spencer could argue further, leaving my brother-in-law fuming in the dark. My mother, Bernice, adjusted her glasses, squinting at the screen. "Well, I suppose we have no choice. At least it is a prestigious event. Maybe we will see someone we know." Spencer grunted, pouring himself another glass of wine, his hands shaking slightly with rage. "We won't see anyone we know, Bernice. These awards are all politics. It is just a bunch of old men patting themselves on the back." On the screen, the camera swept across the audience in the theater. The glitz and glamour were overwhelming. Diamonds sparkled under the stage lights. Famous faces from movies and music videos smiled and waved. The energy in the theater was electric, a stark contrast to the tense atmosphere at Spencer's table. The host of the evening, a charismatic actor, walked to the center of the stage. The music swelled. "Tonight, we honor the architects of sound," the host said. "The men and women who sit in quiet rooms and bleed onto paper so that the rest of us have songs to sing when we fall in love and when we fall apart." My father, Harold, leaned forward mesmerized. "It really is quite something, isn't it? To think that people make a living just writing words." Spencer scoffed, taking a large gulp of wine. "It is not that hard, Harold. It is a formula. You take a few catchy chords, add some lyrics about heartbreak or partying, and boom, you have a hit. Anyone can do it. That is why I am in management. I control the talent. I tell them what to write." Candace picked up her phone again, trying to find a filter that would work in the dark. "Yeah, whatever. It is boring. Just tell me when they get to the best new artist category. I want to see if that girl from TikTok wins." The ceremony progressed. Awards were given for Best Country Song, Best R&B Production, and Lyricist of the Year. Spencer critiqued every single winner loudly. "He is overrated," Spencer said when a famous producer won. "I passed on signing him 3 years ago. He has no longevity." "She only won because her dad knows the chairman," Spencer declared when a young woman accepted an award. "It is all nepotism." Finally, the moment arrived. The lights on the television screen turned a deep, dramatic blue. The music shifted to a serious orchestral tone. The host stood alone at the podium holding a sealed envelope that looked heavier than the others. And now the host said, his voice echoing through the restaurant. "The moment we have all been waiting for, the highest honor of the night, Songwriter of the Year. This award recognizes a singular talent whose body of work has defined the sound of the last 12 months. The screen cut to a montage of the 5 nominated songwriters. 4 of them were well-known faces in the industry, men in suits, women in gowns. But the 5th square on the screen was different. It simply showed a silhouette, a black shadow against a white background with the words, the pen written in elegant script underneath. Spencer sat up straight, pointing at the screen with his fork. There. Look at that. That is him. The pen. My mother gasped. Why don't they show his face? Is he a criminal? Spencer laughed, shaking his head at her ignorance. No, Bernice. It is a marketing tactic. It builds mystery. It drives the value up. He is probably some ugly old guy who doesn't want to ruin his brand. But mark my words, that silhouette is a man. You can tell by the font they chose. It is bold, aggressive. The nominees are the host read out. David Foster for his work with Celine Dion. Diane Warren for her balladry. Max Martin for his pop anthems. The team from Sony Music. And finally, the pen for an unprecedented run of 5 number-one hits, including the global smash Gravity. Spencer slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware jump. Gravity. That is the song I told you about. I almost had that song for one of my artists, but my assistant messed up the email. But it doesn't matter. The pen is not going to win. Why not? Candace asked, looking up from her phone for the first time. Because Spencer said, leaning back with a knowing smirk. The industry protects its own. Sony has pushed hard for their team this year. They spent millions on campaigning. The pen is just an independent freelancer. A nobody. The Academy never gives the big award to a ghost. It is going to be the Sony team. Watch. I know how these things work. I am an insider. My father nodded, trusting Spencer's expertise completely. That makes sense, son. You cannot trust these freelancers. They are unpredictable. On the screen, the host began to open the envelope. The drumroll started. It was a low rumble that seemed to vibrate the floorboards of the restaurant. Spencer raised his glass to his lips, his eyes glued to the screen, ready to be proven right, ready to gloat about his knowledge of the inner workings of the business. And the songwriter of the year is the host paused for effect. Spencer opened his mouth to say, "I told you so." But the name that came out of the host's mouth was not the Sony team, and it was not a man's name. "The pen," the host shouted. Spencer froze the wine glass halfway to his mouth. "Well," he stammered. "Okay." Upset. "That happens. But wait until you see him. Wait until that old guy walks out." Also known as the host, continued reading from the card. The incredibly talented Ms. Valerie Johnson. The glass slipped from Spencer's fingers. It hit the edge of the table and shattered. Red wine exploded everywhere, soaking the white tablecloth and splashing onto Candace's dress. But nobody moved. Nobody screamed about the stain, because on the giant 100-inch screen, the camera had cut to the front row of the theater. And there, standing up and smoothing down a gold dress that shimmered like liquid fire, was me. My face was projected larger than life, looming over their table. I was smiling. I looked confident. I looked wealthy. And I looked directly into the camera lens, as if I could see them sitting there in the dark. My mother Bernice let out a strangled sound like she was choking on a bone. Candace dropped her fork. My father's jaw went slack. And Spencer looked like he had seen a ghost. He stared at the screen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The name Valerie Johnson echoed around the silent restaurant, bouncing off the walls and settling into their ears like a sentence. The pen was not a man. The pen was not a stranger. The pen was the woman they had left behind to eat leftovers, and she was currently walking up the stairs to accept the crown they thought belonged to them. The giant screen hanging in the center of Le Monde flickered with the intensity of a lightning storm. The restaurant had fallen into a hush as the entire room turned their attention to the broadcast. Even the waiters stopped moving, their trays held suspended in midair, as if they sensed that history was about to be made. On the screen, the host stood alone in the center of the stage. He held the gold envelope with both hands, looking out at the glittering audience of Hollywood elite and music industry titans. The background music swelled to a crescendo, a deep orchestral thrum that vibrated through the floorboards of the restaurant and rattled the silverware on Spencer's table. This year has been defined by a mystery, the host said, his voice echoing through the speakers. We have danced to the songs. We have cried to the lyrics. We have watched 5 consecutive singles climb to the #1 spot on the Billboard Hot 100. But we have never seen the face behind the magic. Until tonight. Spencer leaned forward in his chair. His eyes were wide and manic, fixed on the screen. He pointed a fork at the television as if he were conducting the ceremony himself. "Here it comes," Spencer announced to the table, his voice dripping with arrogance. "Watch this. It is going to be that guy from Nashville. I met him at a mixer 2 years ago. Heavy smoker, writes dark stuff. It fits the profile perfectly. I am telling you, Harold, I have an instinct for this. I can smell a hitmaker from a mile away." My father Harold nodded, entranced by Spencer's confidence. He cut a piece of steak but did not eat it, holding the fork halfway to his mouth. "You really are an expert, son. It must be amazing to know all these secrets before the rest of the world." Candace rolled her eyes but looked up from her phone. "Okay, fine. Let's see who he is. Maybe he is hot. If he is the pen, he must be loaded." The host on the screen tore the seal of the envelope. The sound of the ripping paper was amplified by the microphone, a sharp tear that sounded like fabric ripping. The camera zoomed in on the host's face. He looked down at the card inside. His eyebrows shot up. A genuine look of surprise crossed his features. He smiled a wide, knowing smile and looked directly into the camera lens. "The winner of the Songwriter of the Year award is," the host said, pausing for dramatic effect. Spencer opened his mouth, ready to shout the name of the man he had invented in his head. "The pen," the host shouted. Spencer slammed his hand on the table. Boom! "I told you! The pen! I knew it!" He turned to my mother, Bernice, with a smug grin. "See, Bernice. This is why I run the department. I knew he would win. Now watch. Here comes the old guy. I am going to find him backstage tomorrow and sign him before he leaves the building." But the host was not finished speaking. He held up a hand to quiet the applause that had started in the theater. "And ladies and gentlemen," the host continued, his voice dropping to a reverent whisper, "tonight, the pen has chosen to step out of the shadows. Please welcome to the stage the genius behind the music, Ms. Valerie Johnson." The name hung in the air. Valerie Johnson. It was a common name. There were probably thousands of Valerie Johnsons in America. But in the restaurant, Le Monde times seemed to distort. The seconds stretched out, becoming long and thin like taffy. Spencer's smug grin did not fade immediately. It stayed frozen on his face, a grotesque mask of victory that was rapidly curdling into confusion. He blinked once, then twice. He looked at the screen, then he looked at Candace, then back at the screen. "Valerie," he whispered. The word sounded foreign in his mouth, like a piece of gristle he could not chew. On the massive projection screen, the camera cut away from the host and swept down to the front row of the theater. The center seat. And there she was. Me. I stood up from my seat. The movement was graceful and deliberate. The gold silk dress caught the stage lights and erupted into flames of shimmering light. It flowed around my body like liquid money. I was not wearing the cardigan my mother hated. I was not wearing the sneakers my sister mocked. I was wearing success. The camera zoomed in tight on my face. My hair was styled in sleek waves that framed my cheekbones. My makeup was flawless, but it was my expression that hit them the hardest. I was not the shy, stuttering sister who sat in the corner at Thanksgiving. I was radiant. I was powerful. I looked like I owned the building. In the restaurant, the reaction was physical. It was violent in its silence. My father Harold was the first to break. The fork he had been holding, the one with the piece of prime steak on it, slipped from his fingers. It did not just fall. It clattered loudly against the fine china plate, the sound sharp and jarring in the quiet room. The steak slid off the plate and landed on the pristine white tablecloth, leaving a greasy brown smear. Harold did not notice. His jaw was unhinged, hanging open so wide that he looked like a caricature of shock. He stared at the screen, his eyes bulging as if his brain was refusing to process the visual data. My daughter, he croaked. That is, that is my daughter, my mother. Bernice let out a sound that was half gasp, half whimper. She brought her hands up to her mouth, covering her lips as if to stifle a scream. Her eyes darted back and forth between the screen and the empty chair at their table. The chair where Valerie the failure was supposed to be sitting. The cognitive dissonance was physically painful for her. She had spent 30 years convincing herself that I was useless. Seeing me being worshipped by thousands of people on national television was shattering her reality. No, she whispered. It is a mistake. It is a look-alike. Valerie is at home. She is grading papers. But Candace knew. Sisters always know. Candace had been holding her phone up ready to record the winner for her story. When my face filled the screen, her hand went limp. The phone slipped from her grasp. It tumbled end over end and hit the marble floor with a sickening crack. The screen shattered. Candace did not look down. She stared at my image, her face draining of all color until her heavy makeup stood out like paint on a corpse. She looks, Candace stammered. She looks rich. And then there was Spencer. Spencer did not drop anything. He did not scream. He simply stopped breathing. The blood drained from his face so completely that he looked green in the flickering light of the television. He stared at me walking up the stairs to the stage. He watched as the CEO of his company, Marcus Sterling, stood up in the background and clapped enthusiastically, beaming at me with pride. Spencer saw his boss. He saw the man he had lied about meeting. He saw that man bowing his head to me as I passed. The realization hit Spencer like a physical blow to the gut. The pen, the mysterious genius he had been mansplaining to the table just 5 minutes ago, the masculine energy he had praised, the intellect he had worshipped. It was me. It was the woman he had called a goldfish, the woman he had mocked for heating up frozen dinners. His world collapsed. The vice president job, the house in Malibu, the reputation he had built on lies. It all disintegrated in seconds. That is. Spencer started to speak, but his voice failed him. He tried again, louder this time, desperation clawing at his throat. That is impossible. She teaches piano to 5-year-olds. She drives a Honda. This is a prank. It has to be a prank. On the screen, I reached the podium. I took the heavy gold trophy from the host. I turned to the microphone. The applause in the theater was deafening. I waited for it to die down. I looked straight into the camera lens. My eyes were cold and clear. In the restaurant, Spencer felt those eyes bore into him. He felt the weight of every insult he had ever thrown at me return to crush him. He slumped back in his chair, his expensive suit suddenly feeling like a prison uniform. He looked around the restaurant. He saw the other diners whispering, pointing at the screen, and then pointing at him. They recognized him now. He was the loud man who had been trashing his sister-in-law all night. The clown who didn't know that royalty was sitting in his family tree. The waiter Darius stood in the shadows near the kitchen door. He watched the family fall apart. A small, satisfied smile played on his lips. He checked the time. The police were 2 minutes away. On the screen, I took a breath. I leaned into the microphone, and I began to speak. The gold gramophone was heavier than I expected. It was solid, cold, and dense. As I lifted it from the podium, the weight of it traveled up my arm and settled into my shoulder. It felt like an anchor grounding me in reality. For years, I had felt like I was floating, drifting through life as a ghost in my own family's narrative. But holding this metal object in my hands, I finally felt real. I finally felt solid. The applause in the Fox Theater was a physical force. It washed over me in waves, crashing against the stage and vibrating through the floorboards beneath my heels. I looked out into the audience. The first few rows were blinded by the stage lights, but I could see the outlines of the industry giants. I saw Marcus Sterling standing and clapping. I saw Sienna wiping a tear from her eye. I saw thousands of people who respected me not for who I married or what house I lived in, but for what I created. I stepped up to the microphone. The stand was a little too high. I adjusted it slowly, taking my time. I was not in a rush. For 32 years, I had been rushing to please others, rushing to hide my true self, rushing to get out of the way so my sister could shine. But tonight, time belonged to me. The theater fell silent. It was a respectful, expectant hush. They wanted to hear the voice of the pen. I took a deep breath. I looked past the audience, past the lights, and stared directly into the lens of the main broadcast camera. The red light on top of the camera was glowing steady and unblinking. I knew that signal traveled through fiber optic cables, bounced off satellites, and beamed directly onto the 100-inch screen at Le Monde restaurant. I knew they were watching. I could feel their gaze on me, just as I could feel the heat of the spotlight. "Thank you," I said. My voice was steady. It did not shake. It resonated through the massive speakers with a clarity that surprised even me. First, I want to thank God for giving me a voice when the world tried to tell me I should remain silent. I want to thank the artists who trusted me with their stories. Sienna, thank you for singing my pain and turning it into power. Marcus and the team at Onyx, thank you for recognizing that talent does not always look the way you expect it to. I paused. I let the silence hang in the air for 3 seconds. I shifted my weight and leaned closer to the microphone. My expression hardened. The smile did not leave my face, but the warmth vanished from my eyes. Tonight is a celebration of truth. And the truth is, I almost did not come here tonight. For a long time, I was told that writing songs was a hobby. I was told it was a cute little pastime for a school teacher. I was told that I should focus on finding a husband, because that was the only way a woman like me could ever find value. A ripple of murmurs went through the crowd. They sensed the shift in tone. They sensed the blood in the water. I gripped the podium. "I have 4 VIP tickets in my purse tonight. They are right here." Right. I looked down at my bag and then back at the camera. I invited the 4 people closest to me in the world: my mother, my father, my sister, and my brother-in-law. In the restaurant Le Monde, the air had been sucked out of the room. Spencer was gripping the tablecloth so hard his knuckles were white. Candace was shaking her head, muttering "no, no, no" under her breath. My parents were frozen like statues, their faces masks of absolute horror. I continued, my voice dropping an octave, intimate and lethal. "They are not here. They sent me a message this afternoon. They told me they did not have time for my pointless little award. They told me that they had better things to do. They told me they were going to a 5-star dinner to celebrate real success." I smiled a cold, dangerous smile. So to my family who are watching this right now, probably sitting at a table at Le Monde, eating a meal you cannot afford, I want to say thank you. Thank you for declining my invitation. Thank you for choosing the appetizers over my achievement. The audience in the theater gasped. The shock was palpable. Nobody had ever done this on live television. It was raw. It was real. Because your absence tonight is the greatest gift you could have given me. Standing here alone holding this award, I have realized something profound. You cannot find your reflection in a broken mirror. And you should never ever seek validation from people who do not have the intellectual capacity to understand your worth. I lifted the trophy higher, the gold gleaming under the lights. This award is not pointless. This award is proof that while you were laughing at me, the world was listening to me. So enjoy your dinner. I hope it tastes like regret. I stepped back from the microphone. For a heartbeat there was total silence, and then the theater erupted. It was not polite applause. It was a roar. People jumped to their feet. It was a standing ovation fueled by the raw emotion of the moment. They loved the underdog. They loved the fire. But back at Le Monde, there was no applause. The restaurant was dead silent. The only sound was the hum of the projector. And then the whispers started. It began at the table right behind Spencer. A couple who had been annoyed by Spencer's loud bragging earlier leaned in close to each other. "Did she say Le Monde?" the woman whispered. "Yes," the man replied loud enough for Spencer to hear. And look at that table. Isn't that the guy who was yelling at the waiter earlier? The one who said his sister-in-law was a nobody. The woman gasped, pointing a manicured finger at Spencer. Oh my God, it is! That is the brother-in-law. He said she was a loser. He said she was a goldfish. The whispers spread like wildfire. The diners at Le Monde were the elite of the city. They were connected, they were gossips, and they smelled a social disaster. He is the one she was talking about. Can you believe it? He is sitting right there. How embarrassing. She just destroyed him on national television. Look at his face. He looks like he is going to throw up. Spencer could feel the eyes of the entire room boring into the back of his neck. It felt like physical heat. He wanted to disappear. He wanted to sink through the floor. He had spent the last 2 hours building a monument to his own ego, loudly proclaiming his superiority to everyone within earshot. He had made sure everyone knew he was the big shot director. He had made sure everyone knew his sister-in-law was a failure. And now the script had flipped. The diners weren't looking at him with envy anymore. They were looking at him with pity. And worse than pity, they were looking at him with ridicule. A man at a nearby table, a prominent lawyer, raised his wine glass in a mocking toast toward Spencer. Spencer flinched. My mother Bernice began to cry. Not soft, elegant tears, but ugly, hacking sobs of humiliation. She covered her face with her napkin. Harold just stared at his plate, wishing he was dead. Candace looked around the room, her eyes wild. She saw the phones coming out. People weren't filming the screen anymore. They were filming them. They were filming the family that the pen had just publicly disowned. She knew that within 10 minutes, this would be trending on Twitter. Her career as an influencer was over. She would be known forever as the jealous sister who missed the biggest night in history for a plate of oysters. Spencer tried to stand up. His legs felt like jelly. He needed to leave. He needed to get out of this spotlight. We have to go, he rasped, his voice weak and trembling. We have to go now. But as he tried to stand, the general manager, Henri, stepped out of the shadows. He blocked the path to the exit. He was not smiling anymore. I am afraid you cannot leave just yet, Monsieur Davis. Henri said, his voice cutting through the whispers. There is the matter of the bill, and since your cards have been declined, we have called the authorities to assist with the transaction. Spencer collapsed back into his chair. On the screen above him, the camera showed me walking off stage, clutching my trophy, surrounded by adoration. In the restaurant, he was trapped, surrounded by judgment. The contrast was perfect. It was a masterpiece of poetic justice written by the best songwriter in the world. And the final verse had just begun. The silence in the restaurant Le Monde was heavy and suffocating. It felt like the air pressure had dropped before a tornado. Spencer sat frozen in his chair, his eyes locked on the black screen of his phone, which sat on the table amidst the wreckage of the spilled wine. His heart was hammering against his ribs so hard he could feel it in his throat. He knew what was coming. He could feel the axe swinging down toward his neck, but he was powerless to move out of the way. Then the vibration started. It began as a low buzz rattling the silverware. Then the screen lit up blindingly bright in the dim restaurant. The caller ID flashed a name that Spencer had programmed in all capital letters to signify respect and fear. Big Boss. It was Marcus Sterling, the CEO of Onyx Records. The man Spencer had lied about meeting. The man who was currently sitting in the Fox Theater, likely fuming with a rage that could burn down a building. Spencer's hand shot out to grab the phone. His fingers were slippery with sweat and spilled wine. He wanted to silence it. He wanted to throw the device across the room. He wanted to crawl under the table and die. But he knew he had to answer. Ignoring Marcus Sterling was professional suicide. He picked up the phone. His thumb hovered over the green answer button. His hand was shaking so violently that he could barely control his movements. He intended to bring the phone to his ear to whisper a desperate apology, to beg for his job in private. But panic makes people clumsy. Instead of hitting the answer button and lifting the phone, Spencer fumbled. His thumb slid across the screen and hit the speakerphone icon just as the connection opened. He dropped the phone back onto the table in his haste to catch it. The connection was live. The volume was set to maximum. Spencer. The voice of Marcus Sterling exploded into the quiet dining room. It was not a whisper. It was a roar amplified by the high-quality speaker of the smartphone and the excellent acoustics of the high-ceilinged atrium. Every single person in the restaurant stopped chewing. The sommelier stopped pouring. The general manager, Henri, crossed his arms and watched with grim satisfaction. Spencer, why? Spencer stammered, leaning over the phone, trying desperately to hit the mute button but missing. Marcus, I can explain. It is a misunderstanding. I did not know. Shut up. Marcus's voice cut through Spencer's stuttering like a guillotine. Do not insult my intelligence by trying to explain. I am standing in the lobby of the Fox Theater right now. I just watched your sister-in-law, Valerie Johnson, accept the award that I sent you to get 6 months ago. Spencer flinched as if he had been slapped. The confirmation was brutal. You told me you were an expert, Spencer. Marcus continued, his voice dripping with venom. You told me you had your finger on the pulse of the industry. You told me the pen was a 50-year-old man from Nashville. You stood in my office and looked me in the eye and told me that women do not have the depth to write this kind of music. A gasp went through the restaurant. The diners looked at Spencer with renewed disgust. The sexism he had spewed earlier was now being broadcast for everyone to hear. Marcus, please. Spencer whined, tears forming in his eyes. I made a mistake. I will fix it. I will go to her house tonight. She is family. She will sign with us. I can make her sign. You will do no such thing. Marcus shouted. She just destroyed you on national television, you idiot. Did you not hear her speech? She thanked you for not coming. She hates you, Spencer, and frankly, after hearing how you treated her, I hate you too, my mother. Bernice put her head on the table and began to sob quietly. My father, Harold, looked at the phone with wide, terrified eyes, realizing that his retirement plan was disintegrating in real time. You are a liability, Marcus said, his voice turning cold and final. You are incompetent. You are arrogant. And you are the single greatest embarrassment to Onyx Records in the history of this company. I do not want you near my artists. I do not want you near my building. Spencer, please listen. Spencer begged, his dignity completely gone. I have a mortgage. I have a lease on the car. You cannot do this. I just did, Marcus said. You are fired, Spencer. Effective immediately. Your company cards have already been deactivated. Your access badge has been revoked. Security will pack up your desk and mail you a box of your personal effects. Do not set foot on the property, or I will have you arrested for trespassing. But Marcus, goodbye, Spencer. And good luck finding another job in this town. After tonight, nobody will hire the man who called the pen a goldfish. Click. The line went dead. The dial tone hummed for a second before the screen went black. For 5 seconds, there was absolute silence in Le Monde. And then the laughter started. It began at the table of the lawyer who had toasted Spencer earlier. It was a low chuckle at first, but it spread. The couple at the next table started giggling. The group of businessmen across the room burst into loud guffaws. It wasn't friendly laughter. It was the cruel, derisive laughter of the elite watching a pretender be stripped naked. They were laughing at his arrogance. They were laughing at his downfall. They were laughing at the poetic justice of it all. Spencer slumped forward in his chair. His soul seemed to leave his body. He looked like a puppet whose strings had been cut. He stared at the blank phone, unable to comprehend the magnitude of what had just happened. 5 minutes ago, he was a director with a bright future. Now he was unemployed, publicly humiliated, and blacklisted from the only industry he knew. Candace looked at her husband. She didn't offer him comfort. She didn't put a hand on his shoulder. She looked at him with a mixture of horror and fury. You lost the job, Candace whispered, her voice trembling. You lost the job. How are we going to pay for the house, Spencer? How are we going to pay for the car? Spencer did not answer. He could not answer. My father. Harold cleared his throat nervously. Well, maybe it is not so bad. Maybe you can talk to him tomorrow when he calms down. You do not understand, Harold. Spencer whispered, his voice hollow. It is over. It is all over. The general manager, Henri, stepped forward again. He signaled to Darius. Bring the bill, Henri said loudly. And bring the portable card machine. Since the corporate card is no longer valid, we will need a personal form of payment immediately, and add a 20% gratuity for the inconvenience caused to my staff and my guests. Spencer looked up at Henri. His eyes were empty. 1. I don't have it. Henri's smile did not waver, but his eyes were hard as flint. I suspected as much. That is why the police officers are waiting in the lobby. They will escort you to the station to sort out the matter of theft of services. Spencer dropped his head into his hands. The laughter around him grew louder. He wished the floor would open up and swallow him whole. But there was no escape. He was trapped in the spotlight of his own making, and the show was far from over. The silence that followed the termination of the call was shattered by the frantic voice of my mother, Bernice. She looked at Spencer's pale face and then at the screen where I was still smiling and holding my trophy. The survival instinct of a parasite is strong, and my mother realized that her host was dying. Spencer was no longer the golden goose. He was a dead weight, and I was the new jackpot. Fix this! Bernice hissed, grabbing Spencer's arm with a grip that dug her nails into his expensive suit jacket. Fix this right now, Spencer. Call her back. Spencer looked at her with hollow eyes. Call who back? Marcus. He fired me, Bernice. He blocked my number. It is over. Not Marcus, you idiot. Bernice snapped, her voice rising to a shrill panic. Call Valerie, call my daughter. She is the one with the power now. If she tells Marcus that this is all a big misunderstanding, he will hire you back. Tell her we were just joking. Tell her we are so proud of her. My father, Harold, nodded frantically, fumbling for his own phone. Yes. Yes, that is it. It was just a family joke. Valerie has a sense of humor. She knows we love her. We just have to get her on the phone before she talks to anyone else. The table erupted into a chaotic flurry of movement. The arrogance and slow dining of the last hour vanished, replaced by the desperate scrambling of rats on a sinking ship. They grabbed their smartphones with trembling hands, their fingers sliding over the screens as they tried to dial the number of the woman they had mocked only 30 minutes ago. Candace was the fastest. She unlocked her phone, her long acrylic nails clicking loudly against the glass. She pulled up my contact info. She had me saved in her phone as Val School because she refused to acknowledge me as anything other than a teacher. She hit the call button. She held the phone to her ear, her eyes darting around the restaurant, hoping that the other diners would see her talking to the star of the night. Pick up. Pick up, Candace whispered. Come on, Valerie. Don't be a brat. The line did not even ring. It went straight to a generic, automated message. The customer you are trying to reach is not accepting calls at this time. Candace pulled the phone away and stared at it. She sent it to voicemail. She pressed call again. The same result. Immediate rejection. She is not answering. Candace said, her voice trembling. Text her. My mother commanded. Text her and tell her we are at Le Monde and we want to buy her a celebratory drink. Tell her we love the dress. Compliment the dress, Candace. You know she likes fashion. Candace opened her messaging app. She typed furiously. Val, oh my God, we are literally screaming. You look amazing. We were totally joking earlier about not coming. We just wanted to surprise you later. Call us ASAP. Love you, sis. She hit send. For years, whenever Candace texted me, the message would appear in a blue bubble, indicating that we were both using iPhones. It was a digital link between us. But tonight, as Candace watched the screen, something different happened. The message did not turn blue. It turned a harsh, unforgiving green. And underneath the green bubble, a small red exclamation point appeared with the words, "Not delivered." Candace gasped. She tapped the screen violently, trying to resend the message, but the green bubble remained. "What is it?" Bernice asked, leaning over her shoulder. "She blocked me." Candace whispered, the horror dawning on her face. "She didn't just ignore me, Mom. She blocked my number. The message won't go through." My father Harold was holding his phone to his ear, his face gray. "I am getting the voicemail too," he said, his voice cracking. "It just rings once and cuts off." "Leave a message, Harold," Bernice screamed. "Leave a message right now. Sound fatherly. Sound proud. Make her feel guilty." Harold waited for the beep. He cleared his throat, trying to summon the authoritative voice he used to control me when I was a child. "Valerie, honey, it is Dad. We are watching you on the big screen. Wow. Just wow. We are so overwhelmed. Listen, we are at Le Monde. We ordered a bottle of champagne for you. We want you to come here straight after the ceremony. We need to talk about your future. We are a family, Valerie. Call me back immediately." He hung up. He looked at the phone, praying that it would ring back instantly. It stayed silent. They sat there surrounded by the wreckage of their dinner and the wreckage of their lives. They realized with a sinking feeling that this was not an impulsive tantrum on my part. I had not blocked them in a fit of rage 5 minutes ago. The coordination was too perfect. The blocked calls, the blocked texts, the speech. "She planned this," Spencer whispered. He was still staring at the table, but his mind was racing. "She knew. She knew exactly what she was doing. She waited until she was on stage. She waited until I was fired. And then she cut the line." My mother Bernice shook her head in denial. "No, Valerie is not that cruel. She is soft, she is weak. She will call back. She needs us. She has always needed our approval." "Look at the screen, Bernice." Spencer spat, pointing a shaking finger at the giant projection. "Look at her face. Does she look like she needs your approval?" On the screen, I was walking off stage. A reporter had stopped me. The camera zoomed in. The reporter asked me a question that was broadcast into the restaurant. "Valerie, you just gave a very emotional speech about your family. Is there anything you want to say to them now in case they are watching?" In the restaurant, my family leaned in, holding their breath. This was it. This was the moment I would crack. This was the moment I would say I loved them and invite them to the after party. On screen, I looked at the reporter. I smiled. It was a smile of absolute freedom. "No," I said. "I have said everything I needed to say. My focus now is on my work and the people who actually support it. I have a party to get to." And then I turned and walked away. The feed cut back to the host. In Le Monde, the reality settled over them like a shroud. I was gone. I had ascended to a level they could not reach, and I had pulled up the ladder behind me. Candace started to cry, real tears this time. Not because she missed her sister, but because she realized she had just lost her access to wealth. She had lost the connection that could have saved her social standing. "What are we going to do?" Candace sobbed. "Spencer lost his job. We cannot pay for this dinner. And Valerie is gone." My mother Bernice sat back in her chair. The fight drained out of her. She looked old suddenly. The lines on her face deepened under the harsh emergency lighting of the restaurant. She had gambled everything on the golden child and the successful son-in-law. She had bet against the black sheep, and she had lost. The general manager Henri approached the table again. He was flanked by 2 large security guards and 2 uniformed police officers who had just entered the lobby. "Ladies and gentlemen," Henri said, his voice devoid of any warmth, "the show is over, and it is time to settle the account." Spencer looked up at the police officers. He looked at his wife, who was weeping into her napkin. He looked at his in-laws, who were staring at the floor in shame. And then he looked at his phone one last time, praying for a miracle. Praying that the name Val's school would pop up on the screen. But the screen remained black. The only thing illuminated was the reflection of his own terrified face. I had cut the cord, and they were drifting into the dark water all alone. The general manager, Henri, did not wait for an answer. He snapped his fingers, and Darius the waiter stepped forward, placing a small leather folder in the center of the table. It landed with a soft thud that sounded like a gavel hitting a judge's bench. Spencer stared at the folder. For a moment, he did not move. He was still reeling from the phone call, still hearing the echo of Marcus Sterling's voice firing him. But the reality of the restaurant was pressing in on him. The smell of the expensive steak he could not pay for the sight of the spilled wine staining the tablecloth and the expectant stare of the manager. "Open it," Henri said softly. Spencer reached out with a trembling hand. He flipped open the leather cover. His eyes scanned the bottom line. $4,520. He swallowed hard. His throat felt like it was filled with sand. Under normal circumstances, this bill would have been a badge of honor. He would have slapped his corporate card down, made a joke about business expenses, and walked out feeling like a king. But tonight, that number looked like a prison sentence. Spencer reached into his jacket pocket. His muscle memory took over. He pulled out the sleek black Onyx Records corporate card. It was heavy, made of metal. It was the symbol of his authority. He held it out to Henri, trying to summon a shred of his former arrogance. "Just run it," Spencer croaked. "It will go through." Marcus was just angry. He wouldn't cut off the finance department that fast. Henri took the card. He did not walk away to a register. He pulled a portable card terminal from his pocket. He inserted the card right there at the table in front of everyone. The machine whirred. The screen flashed, processing. My mother Bernice held her breath, clasping her hands together in prayer. "Please," she whispered. "Just let us leave." The machine let out a loud, sharp beep. It was a rejection sound, a sound of failure. On the small screen, the words appeared in bright red letters. "Declined. Card inactive." Henri pulled the card out and held it up. "As I suspected, this card has been reported lost or stolen by the issuer. I am required to confiscate it." He slipped the metal card into his own pocket. Spencer's face went gray. He felt sweat trickling down his back. "Try this one," he said, fumbling for his wallet. He pulled out his personal platinum Visa. It was the card he used to lease his car, the card he used to buy Candace's jewelry, the card that had been maxed out for months. He prayed that maybe the billing cycle had reset. Maybe there was just enough credit left to cover this disaster. Henri took the second card. He inserted it. The silence at the table was agonizing. 5 seconds felt like 5 years. Beep. Declined. Insufficient funds. Henri looked at the screen and then at Spencer. His expression was one of pure pity mixed with disgust. "It seems your personal finances are in no better shape than your professional ones, Monsieur Davis." Spencer slumped back in his chair. He looked at Candace. "Babe," he whispered, "do you have your card?" Candace recoiled. "Me? You know I don't have a limit on my card, Spencer. You told me to use yours. My account is overdrawn from the spa day yesterday. You said you would transfer the money this morning." Spencer turned to my mother. "Bernice. Harold, please. I will pay you back tomorrow. I swear. Just cover the bill." My mother looked away, tears streaming down her face. She opened her designer purse. It was empty. She had brought it for show, not for function. Spencer looked at my father. "Harold, you must have something." Harold reached into the back pocket of his trousers. He pulled out an old, worn B-fold wallet. His hands were shaking so badly that he dropped a few coins onto the floor. He opened the wallet. There were no credit cards inside. Harold did not believe in credit. He only carried cash. He pulled out the bills one by one, counting them with trembling fingers. 20, 40, 50. He looked up at Spencer, his eyes filled with shame. "I have $50, son. That is all I have on me. I thought you were treating us." $50. It wasn't even enough to cover the cost of the water they had managed to drink. Henri let out a long, weary sigh. He tapped the screen of the card terminal and put it away. $50, he repeated. You have consumed $4,000 worth of vintage wine and prime beef, and you offer me $50. He straightened his jacket and looked toward the entrance of the restaurant. Officers, if you would please. Two uniformed police officers who had been standing quietly in the shadows of the lobby stepped forward. They walked through the dining room, their heavy boots thudding against the marble floor. The sound was ominous. Other diners stopped whispering and watched in fascination. The officers arrived at the table. One was a tall man with a stern face. The other was younger, holding a notepad. Is there a problem here, Mr. Henri? The older officer asked. Yes, Henri said, gesturing to my family. These patrons have consumed a significant amount of food and alcohol and are unable to pay. The total is $4,500. The officer looked down at Spencer. Sir, is this true? Can you pay this bill? Spencer tried to stand up, but his legs gave way and he sat back down hard. Officer, listen, I am Spencer Davis. I am a director at Onyx Records. I can pay. I just need to make a phone call. My sister-in-law is Valerie Johnson, the Pen. She just won an award. She will pay for this. The officer looked unimpressed. Sir, I do not care who your sister-in-law is. Unless she is here right now with a valid credit card, you are committing theft of services. That is a felony in this state given the amount. A felony. The word hung in the air. Candace let out a wail. I cannot go to jail. I am an influencer. My brand cannot handle a mugshot. The officer turned to her. Ma'am, calm down. Unless you have a way to settle this debt right now, you will all need to come with us to the station. We can sort out the booking there. Booking. Station. My father Harold began to hyperventilate. He clutched his chest. I have never broken a law in my life. I am a deacon at my church. You cannot arrest me. Henri looked at them cold and unmoving. I am willing to not press charges immediately if you leave my establishment right now and leave collateral, watches, jewelry, anything of value to secure the debt until you can return with cash tomorrow. Spencer looked down at his wrist. He was wearing the fake Rolex he had bought in Chinatown. He knew that if he handed it over, Henri would know it was a fake immediately. The humiliation would be absolute. He slowly unclasped the watch. He handed it to Henri. Henri took the watch. He looked at the weight of it. He looked at the movement of the second hand. He curled his lip. This is a replica, he said loud enough for the table next to them to hear. This is worthless. Spencer closed his eyes. The officer stepped forward. Okay, that is enough. Stand up. All of you. Hands where I can see them. Spencer, Candace, Harold, and Bernice stood up. They were a trembling, broken mess. Turn around, the officer commanded. Spencer felt the cold steel of handcuffs click around his wrists. It was a sound he never thought he would hear. Candace screamed as the other officer cuffed her. Wait! Harold cried, holding up his $50. Take the money. Take the 50. It is evidence now, sir, the officer said, culling Harold's hands behind his back. The procession began. The officers led my family through the center of the restaurant. It was a long walk, the longest walk of their lives. They had to pass every single table. They had to pass the lawyer who had toasted them. They had to pass the businessmen who had laughed at them. They had to pass the table of socialites who were now recording everything on their phones. Flashlights from smartphones popped like paparazzi cameras, but not for admiration, for documentation, for gossip. Look at them, a woman whispered loudly. That is the family that rejected the pen. Karma is real, a man replied, shaking his head. Spencer walked with his head down, staring at his expensive Italian shoes. The shoes he had bought on credit. The shoes that were now carrying him to a police cruiser. Candace was sobbing uncontrollably, her makeup running down her face in black streaks. She looked like a tragic clown. My parents walked behind them looking small and frail. They had spent their whole lives worrying about appearances, worrying about what the neighbors would think. And now they were being marched out of the most expensive restaurant in the city in handcuffs. As they reached the glass doors, Henri the manager held one door open. He did not say thank you. He did not say come again. He simply said goodbye. Outside, the cool night air hit their faces. The red and blue lights of the police cars reflected off the windows of the restaurant. It was a light show, but it wasn't the warm glow of a stage. It was the harsh strobe of justice. Spencer was pushed into the back of the first cruiser. The hard plastic seat was uncomfortable. The car smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. He looked out the window. Across the street on a giant digital billboard, the image of the Songwriter of the Year changed. It showed my face smiling, holding the trophy. The caption read, "Valerie Johnson is the pen." Spencer stared at my face. He stared at the success he had mocked. He stared at the sister-in-law he had underestimated. And as the police car pulled away, taking him to a cell, he finally understood the true cost of that dinner. It hadn't cost $4,000. It had cost him everything. The taxi ride back to the Buckhead estate was the longest journey of their lives. It was 2 a.m. when they finally unlocked the heavy front door. They had been processed at the station, fingerprinted, and released with a court date for theft of services. The humiliation still clung to their skin like a bad smell. Spencer did not hold the door for Candace. He stormed inside, kicking off his expensive Italian loafers that were now scuffed from the police station floor. He walked straight to the liquor cabinet in the living room. His hands were shaking as he poured himself a glass of whiskey. He downed it in one gulp and then threw the glass into the fireplace. It shattered with a violence that made my mother Bernice jump. "This is a nightmare," Spencer screamed, his voice hoarse. "I am going to sue her. I am going to sue Marcus. I am going to sue the restaurant. They cannot treat me like this." Candace slumped onto the white sofa, dragging her mascara-stained face across the expensive fabric. "Stop it, Spencer. Just stop it. You don't have a job. We don't have money for a lawyer. We barely had money for the taxi." My father Harold sat on the edge of a chair, looking small and defeated. He stared at the grand staircase, the marble floors, the crystal chandelier. This house was the only thing they had left. It was the symbol that they were still better than everyone else. "At least we have the house," Harold whispered. "As long as we have the house, we can rebuild. We can refinance. We can figure something out." They went to bed in silence, but nobody slept. The house that usually felt like a palace now felt like a tomb. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a taunt. The sun rose over Atlanta at 6 a.m. It was a bright, cheerful light that felt cruel against their hangover of shame. At 8 o'clock sharp, the doorbell rang. It was not the hesitant ring of a neighbor. It was a long, firm press, a summons. Candace sat up in bed. Her eyes were swollen. "Maybe it is Valerie," she whispered, a flicker of hope igniting in her chest. Maybe she felt bad. Maybe she is here to apologize and pay the bail money. Spencer scrambled out of bed. He threw on a silk robe, trying to regain some semblance of dignity. He ran down the stairs, followed closely by Candace and my parents. Spencer threw open the front door, ready to launch into a speech about family loyalty. But the words died in his throat. Standing on the porch was not me. It was a man in a charcoal gray suit. He held a briefcase in one hand and a tablet in the other. He looked sharp, professional, and entirely unamused. Behind him stood 2 large men in uniforms that read Private Security Eviction Team. Spencer tightened his robe. "Who are you?" "We are not buying anything. Get off my property." The man in the suit adjusted his glasses. He did not smile. "Mr. Spencer Davis and Mrs. Candace Davis, my name is Arthur Pym. I am the senior legal counsel representing the property management firm that oversees this estate." Spencer sneered. "I know who the management firm is. I deal with them every month when I send my check. I don't need a lawyer at my door at 8 in the morning." Mr. Pym stepped forward. "Actually, Mr. Davis, you do not deal with the firm. You deal with a shell corporation. And as of this morning, that corporation has activated the immediate termination clause in your rent-to-own agreement." Candace pushed past Spencer. Termination. What are you talking about? We have a contract. We are buying this house. Mr. Pym opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick document. He flipped to page 42. According to the contract you signed 3 years ago, there are 3 specific conditions that allow the landlord to void the lease and evict the tenants immediately without a 30-day notice. He held up a finger. Condition 1. Insolvency or loss of primary income that guarantees the mortgage payments. Mr. Davis, I received a notification from Onyx Records at 7:30 this morning that your employment has been terminated for cause. Since your salary was the sole guarantor of this lease, you are now considered a high-risk tenant. Spencer's face went pale. How do you know that? That is private information. Mr. Pym ignored him. Condition 2. Engagement in criminal activity or conduct that brings disrepute to the property or the neighborhood. I have a police report here stating that all 4 occupants of this house were arrested last night for felony theft of services. That is a violation of the morality clause. My father, Harold, grabbed the doorframe for support. Morality clause. We are good people. It was a misunderstanding. Mr. Pym held up a third finger. And finally, condition 3. Failure to disclose financial status changes to the primary owner. Spencer laughed a desperate, hysterical sound. The primary owner is a faceless corporation. It is called VJ Holdings. I send the check to a P.O. box. Who cares about the owner? Mr. Pym paused. A small, cold smile touched his lips. He looked at Spencer with the look a predator gives to wounded prey. It is interesting that you mention the name of the holding company, Mr. Davis, VJ Holdings. Have you never wondered what the letters V and J stand for? Spencer stopped laughing. The silence stretched out on the porch. The birds stopped singing. The wind stopped blowing. V.J. Spencer whispered the letters. Candace gasped. Her hands flew to her mouth. No. Mr. Pym nodded slowly. Yes, Mrs. Davis. V.J. Holdings stands for Valerie Johnson Holdings. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Spencer grabbed the porch railing to keep from falling. Valerie. Spencer choked out. Valerie owns this house. Mr. Pym consulted his tablet. Miss Johnson purchased this property 5 years ago shortly after her first major royalty check cleared. She set up the rent-to-own agreement through my firm specifically to give her sister a chance at a luxury lifestyle she could not afford on her own. Ms. Johnson has been subsidizing your rent for 3 years. You have been paying 40% of the market value. She has been paying the rest. My mother Bernice let out a wail. She collapsed onto the porch steps. She paid for it. My Valerie paid for it. And we treated her like a beggar. Mr. Pym closed the folder with a snap. Ms. Johnson left specific instructions this morning, due to the violation of the morality clause and your public disparagement of the landlord, which is also a breach of contract. She is exercising her right to reclaim the property. He looked at his watch. You have 2 hours to vacate the premises. You may take your personal clothing and toiletries. Furniture, electronics, and appliances are the property of VJ Holdings and must remain. The security team behind me will supervise the move to ensure nothing of value is stolen. 2 hours. Candace screamed. That is impossible. We have nowhere to go. Mr. Pym shrugged. That is not my concern, Mrs. Davis. Nor is it Miss Johnson's. She is currently on a private jet to Paris for Fashion Week and does not wish to be disturbed. Spencer looked at the lawyer. He looked at the security guards who were already stepping onto the porch ready to enforce the order. He looked at the house that he thought was his kingdom. It was never his. He had been living in a dollhouse built by the woman he called a goldfish. He had been sleeping under a roof paid for by the songs he mocked. He had been eating food bought with the money he said she didn't have. He was not a king. He was a squatter. Please, Spencer whispered. Just let me call her. Mr. Pym turned to walk away. I wouldn't bother Mr. Davis. As I understand it, she has blocked your number. And even if she hadn't, I do not think she has time for people who do not pay their bills. The security guards moved forward. 2 hours, folks, the lead guard said. Let's get moving. I would hate to have to call the police again. I hear you are already on a first-name basis with them. Spencer turned and walked back into the house. But it wasn't his house anymore. It was just a building owned by the pen. And he was just a trespasser running out of time. The 2-hour deadline hung over the house like a guillotine blade waiting to drop. The silence of the morning was replaced by the frantic, chaotic sounds of a life being dismantled in fast forward. It was the sound of zippers tearing open, the sound of hangers clattering onto hardwood floors, the sound of heavy breathing and suppressed sobs. In the master bedroom, Candace was moving with the desperate energy of a woman trying to save her soul from a burning building. But she wasn't reaching for family photo albums. She wasn't reaching for her wedding veil or sentimental keepsakes. She was knee-deep in her walk-in closet, clawing at shelves of handbags and shoes. She grabbed a limited edition Louis Vuitton tote. She hugged it to her chest for a second before throwing it into a black heavy-duty trash bag. Then she grabbed a Gucci crossbody, then a Chanel flap bag. A security guard stood in the doorway, his arms crossed over his chest, watching her with a blank expression. He stepped forward as she reached for a jewelry box. "Check the box, ma'am," the guard said, his voice flat. "We need to make sure you aren't taking property that belongs to the house furnishings." Candace spun around, her eyes wild and red-rimmed. "These are mine. These are my investments." She dumped the contents of the jewelry box onto the bed. Costume jewelry spilled out, mixed with a few pieces that looked expensive from a distance but lacked the luster of quality up close. The guard glanced at them and stepped back uninterested. He knew what real gold looked like, and this wasn't it. Candace went back to stuffing the bags. As she packed, the truth of her lifestyle began to unravel physically before her eyes. The Chanel bag had a small tag inside that read "Made in China," a high-quality replica she had bought on Canal Street to impress her Instagram followers. The red-bottom shoes she was throwing into the bag were scuffed, and she still owed 3 payments on them to the credit card company. Her entire identity was being stuffed into garbage bags. The facade of the wealthy Buckhead housewife was being stripped away, leaving only a terrified woman with a mountain of debt and a collection of counterfeit leather. Downstairs in the living room, the atmosphere was toxic. Spencer sat on the edge of the white sofa, the only piece of furniture he hadn't tried to break in his earlier rage. He wasn't packing. He refused to pack. He stared at the empty fireplace, holding a glass of tap water because all the alcohol had been locked away by the eviction team. My father, Harold, was struggling to fold a pile of coats near the door. His hands were shaking so badly he couldn't get the buttons to line up. He looked aged. He looked like he had aged 20 years in 12 hours. Spencer watched him with eyes full of hate. "This is your fault, Harold." Spencer spat the words out like poison. Harold froze. "My fault? Spencer, how is this my fault? I didn't get fired. I didn't get arrested." Spencer stood up, kicking a cushion across the room. "You raised her. You and Bernice. You raised that monster. You let her sit in her room and write those stupid songs. You didn't beat the rebellion out of her. You created a vindictive, cold-hearted snake who would throw her own family onto the street." My mother, Bernice, was standing in the kitchen staring at the marble countertops she loved so much. She heard Spencer's words and walked into the living room. Her voice was trembling, but for the first time in years it wasn't trembling with admiration for her son-in-law. "We raised a genius," Bernice whispered. "We raised a genius and we treated her like a failure. That is what we did, Spencer. And we did it because we were too busy listening to you." Spencer laughed, a harsh barking sound. "Listening to me? I gave you a taste of the good life, Bernice. Who drove you to the country club? Who bought you those dinners? Me. I did that. And now that things get a little tough, you turn on me." "Things aren't a little tough, Spencer. Harold said, his voice rising. "We are homeless, we are destitute, and we are only in this position because we bet everything on you. We thought you were the golden ticket. We thought Valerie was the burden." Harold looked down at his hands. "We were wrong. We were so wrong. We bet on the wrong horse, and now we have lost the farm." Bernice looked at Spencer with clarity for the first time. She saw the cheap dye job in his hair. She saw the panic behind his eyes. She saw him not as a powerful executive, but as a small, insecure man who had built a castle on a foundation of lies and credit card debt. And Valerie. Bernice thought of her daughter, the quiet girl who drove a Honda, the girl who never asked for money, the girl who had secretly bought this mansion to keep a roof over her sister's head. Valerie wasn't just rich. She was kind. Or at least she had been kind until they pushed her too far. They had traded a diamond for a piece of broken glass because the glass sparkled more, and now the glass had cut them. Upstairs, Candace let out a scream of frustration. The zipper on the trash bag had burst, spilling her fake designer bags onto the floor. She fell to her knees, sobbing into the pile of synthetic leather. "I can't do this," she wailed. "I can't leave. What will I tell people? What will I tell my followers?" The security guard checked his watch. He tapped his earpiece. "Time is up, folks. The trucks are here. You need to vacate the property immediately." Spencer looked around the living room one last time. He looked at the painting over the mantelpiece, a generic abstract piece that came with the house. He realized he didn't own a single thing of value in this room. Even the air he was breathing felt like it belonged to Valerie. "Let's go," Spencer muttered. He didn't offer to help Harold with the heavy coats. He didn't go upstairs to help his wife with her bags. He walked to the front door and opened it. Outside, a yellow taxicab was idling in the driveway. It wasn't a black SUV. It wasn't a limousine. It was a dirty, beat-up taxi with a dent in the fender. Candace came stumbling down the stairs, dragging 2 bursting black trash bags. Her makeup was smeared and her hair was a mess. She looked like a refugee from a fashion disaster. Harold and Bernice followed, carrying 2 suitcases that contained all the clothes they owned. They walked out onto the porch. The sun was shining brightly on the manicured lawn. The fountain in the driveway was bubbling cheerfully. It was a beautiful day for everyone except them. As they stepped onto the driveway, the neighbors across the street were watching. Mrs. Higgins, the neighborhood gossip, was standing by her mailbox, pretending to check for letters, but her eyes were glued to the spectacle. She saw the trash bags. She saw the security guards. She saw the taxi. Candace saw Mrs. Higgins and lowered her head, shielding her face with her hair. The shame was absolute. The social death was complete. The security guard locked the front door behind them. The click of the deadbolt echoed like a gunshot. He placed a bright orange sticker on the door. Evicted. Possession reclaimed by owner. They piled into the taxi. It was a tight squeeze. Spencer sat in the front seat staring straight ahead. Candace and her parents squeezed into the back with the trash bags on their laps. The car smelled of stale cigarettes and pine air freshener. "Where to?" the driver asked, chewing on a toothpick. Nobody answered for a moment. They didn't have a destination. They didn't have a plan. "Just drive," Spencer said. "Just get us away from here." As the taxi pulled away, rolling down the long driveway past the iron gates, Harold looked back through the rear window. He looked at the house one last time. He thought about Valerie sitting in Paris, drinking champagne and being celebrated by the world. He realized then that the distance between the back seat of this taxi and that house wasn't just physical. It was a distance measured in integrity, in humility, in love. They had traveled so far to get away from Valerie's ordinariness, only to find that her ordinary life was a paradise they had been exiled from. And as the gates closed, shutting them out forever, Harold closed his eyes and finally let the tears fall. They were on their own now. And for the first time in their lives, there was nobody coming to save them. The fluorescent lights of the 24-hour burger joint hummed with a low, irritating buzz that seemed to drill directly into Spencer's headache. It was 10 in the morning, but inside the restaurant, it felt like a timeless purgatory of grease and despair. The air smelled of stale French fries and industrial floor cleaner. My family sat huddled in a booth at the back near the restrooms. They were surrounded by their suitcases and the black trash bags that contained the remnants of their former lives. They looked like ghosts. Spencer's designer suit was wrinkled and stained with sweat. Candace's mascara was smeared under her eyes, making her look like a bruised raccoon. My parents. Harold and Bernice stared into their cups of cheap, watery coffee as if searching for answers in the dark liquid. They had nowhere to go. Their credit cards were dead, their reputation was destroyed, and they were terrified. Candace had her phone propped up against a napkin holder. The screen was cracked from when she dropped it the night before, but it still worked. They were huddled around it, watching a live stream of the country's most popular morning talk show, The Elena Show. Everyone in America watched Elena. An appearance on her couch was the ultimate seal of approval. It was the victory lap. Turn it up. Bernice whispered, her voice raspy from crying. Turn it up. I want to hear what she says. Spencer reached out and tapped the volume button. His hand was shaking. He hated me. He hated that I had the power. But he also knew that I was their only lifeline. If I went on national television and said that I forgave them, if I said that family was everything, then maybe, just maybe, the eviction order would be canceled. Maybe Marcus would hire him back. Maybe the nightmare would end. On the small cracked screen, the studio audience cheered wildly. The camera panned across a set that looked like a cozy living room but cost more than my parents' entire life savings. Sitting in a plush cream-colored armchair across from the host was me. I looked different than I had at the award ceremony. I wasn't wearing the gold armor anymore. I was wearing a soft white cashmere sweater and tailored trousers. I looked relaxed. I looked at peace. I looked like a woman who had just exhaled for the first time in 30 years. Valerie, the host Elena said, leaning forward warmly, the world is falling in love with you. You went from an unknown teacher to the biggest name in music overnight. And that speech. My God, that speech. Everyone is talking about it. I smiled on the screen. It was a genuine smile. Thank you, Elena. It has been a whirlwind. I am just trying to stay grounded. In the burger joint, my father Harold leaned in closer. See? He whispered desperately. She is staying grounded. That is good. That sounds like my Valerie. She is still humble. She won't abandon us. On the screen, Elena shifted in her seat. Her expression became serious. Valerie, I have to ask. You mentioned your family in your speech. You thanked them for not coming. That was a very powerful statement. A lot of people interpreted that as anger. But looking at you now, I don't see anger. I see clarity. Can you tell us where you stand with them today? The air in the burger joint seemed to freeze. A fry cook in the back dropped a basket into the oil with a hiss, but my family didn't hear it. They stopped breathing. This was it. This was the verdict. Candace closed her eyes and clasped her hands together. Please, Val, please. Just say you miss us. Just say it is complicated. Don't bury us. On the screen, I looked down at my hands for a moment. Then I looked up at Elena. You know, Elena, I said, my voice soft but steady. For a long time, I thought love was about proving your worth. I thought if I just achieved enough, if I was just successful enough, my family would finally make space for me at their table. I paused. But last night taught me something essential. When they chose a fancy dinner over my award ceremony, they didn't break my heart. They freed it. Spencer winced. Freed it? What does that mean? I continued. They taught me the greatest lesson about independence. If they had come last night, if they had sat in the front row and clapped, I might have spent the rest of my life owing my success to their support. I might have felt obligated to carry them with me. I looked directly into the camera. My eyes were kind, but they were distant. They were the eyes of a stranger, but by rejecting me, by pushing me away, They gave me the permission to fly solo. They cut the strings for me so I didn't have to do it myself, and for that I am incredibly grateful. Elena nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of the words. So you are saying there is no relationship there anymore? I shook my head. No, there is a past, but there is no relationship. I wish them well. Truly I do. I hope they find happiness, but they will have to find it on their own. I have closed that door, and I have changed the locks. Changed the locks. The phrase hit my family with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't a metaphor, it was literal. They had been evicted. They had been locked out. And now they were being locked out of my life permanently. No. Bernice wailed. She buried her face in her hands and began to sob loudly, causing the other patrons in the restaurant to turn and stare. She can't do this. I am her mother. She can't just wish me well like I am a stranger. Harold slumped against the booth. The hope that had been keeping him upright finally snapped. She is gone, Bernice. She is really gone. Spencer stared at the screen with a look of pure hatred mixed with terrifying realization. He saw the way the audience clapped for me. He saw the way Elena looked at me with respect. He realized that to the world I was the hero of this story, and he was the villain who had been left behind. She just killed us, Spencer whispered. He didn't yell, he didn't scream, he sounded defeated. She didn't use a lawyer, she didn't use a gun, she just went on TV and smiled and told the world we don't matter. Candace picked up the phone. Her fingers were trembling. She wanted to throw it. She wanted to smash the image of my happy face. But she couldn't. It was her phone. It was the last valuable thing she owned. On the screen, the interview was wrapping up. Valerie Johnson, everyone, Elena announced. The Pen. Her new album is out tomorrow, and something tells me this is just the beginning. I waved to the crowd. The music swelled. The screen on Candace's phone faded to black as the battery finally died. The screen went dark, reflecting their 4 miserable faces. They sat in silence for a long time. The smell of grease was overwhelming now. The reality of their situation settled in. They had no home, they had no money, they had no connections, and the one person who could have saved them had just publicly wished them luck and walked away. A teenager in a paper hat walked over to their booth. He held a mop in one hand. "Excuse me, folks," he said, popping his gum. "You have been sitting here for 2 hours. Unless you are going to order more food, I am going to have to ask you to clear out. We need the table for paying customers." Spencer looked up at the boy. Paying customers. The words echoed in his head. Yesterday he was screaming at waiters for not bringing vintage wine fast enough. Today he was being kicked out of a burger joint by a teenager with a mop. Spencer stood up. He didn't have the energy to argue. He didn't have the arrogance left to fight. "Come on," he said to his family. "Let's go." "Where are we going?" Candace asked, her voice small and broken like a child's. "I don't know," Spencer said, picking up a trash bag. "I honestly don't know." They walked out of the restaurant into the harsh light of the parking lot. The city of Atlanta moved around them, busy and loud and indifferent to their suffering. Somewhere in the distance, a private jet was taking off, carrying me to Paris. But down here on the pavement, my family stood alone. They had taught me how to fly, and in return, I had left them on the ground where they belonged. It took exactly 30 days for the illusion of the Davis family to crumble completely into dust. Without the glue of money and the shiny veneer of perceived success, the cracks in their relationships turned into canyons that they could not bridge. Spencer and Candace did not have a dramatic Hollywood divorce. There were no high-priced lawyers fighting over assets because there were no assets left to fight over. There was only debt, mountains of it. The divorce papers were signed on a sticky table in a rented efficiency apartment that smelled of mildew. They fought over who would take the debt from the wedding. They fought over who was to blame for their downfall. In the end, Spencer walked away with his clothes in a duffel bag and a bruised ego that would never heal. He moved to a small town in Alabama where nobody knew who he was. He got a job selling used cars. Every day he would look at the cheap sedans on the lot and remember the phantom Rolls-Royce he thought he deserved. He never worked in the music industry again. The blacklisting was absolute. Marcus Sterling had made sure that Spencer's name was poisoned from coast to coast. Candace stayed in Atlanta, but she disappeared from the social scene. Her Instagram account, which once boasted 50,000 followers, went silent. She couldn't bear to post photos of her new reality. She got a job as a receptionist at a dental clinic. It was honest work, hard work, the kind of work she used to mock me for doing. Every time she answered the phone, she flinched, half expecting to hear my voice on the other end. But I never called. My parents, Harold and Bernice, suffered the quietest and perhaps the most painful fate. They moved back into the cramping two-bedroom apartment complex where we had lived when I was a child. The circle was complete. They were back exactly where they started 40 years ago. But this time they didn't have the hope of a bright future. They only had the bitter aftertaste of regret. They stopped going to their church because they couldn't handle the pitying looks from the congregation. They spent their days sitting in their small living room watching the television. Every commercial break seemed to feature a song I wrote. Every news cycle seemed to mention my breaking records. My success became the soundtrack to their misery. They had bet their retirement on the golden child, and she had gone bankrupt. They had discarded the black sheep, and she had become a queen. 3,000 miles away, the Pacific Ocean crashed against the white sand of Malibu. The rhythm of the waves was steady and calming, a natural metronome that soothed my soul. I sat on the terrace of my new home. It was a modern masterpiece of glass and steel, perched on a cliff overlooking the water. I had bought it with cash. No loans, no rent-to-own agreements. It was mine. Inside the house, behind the glass walls, was my private recording studio. The walls were lined with platinum records. My new piano, a Steinway Grand, stood in the center of the room. It was the instrument I used to write my latest album, an album that was currently #1 in 20 countries. The air smelled of salt and jasmine. I took a sip of herbal tea and picked up my phone. I hadn't looked at the blocked list in a month, but today I felt ready. I opened the settings. There they were, 4 names trapped in a digital purgatory: Mom, Dad, Candace, Spencer. I looked at the names. I waited for the familiar pang of guilt. I waited for the old voice in my head to tell me that I was a bad daughter, that I was being cruel. But the voice didn't come. Instead, I felt a lightness in my chest. I realized that for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for them to pick me. I had picked myself. I tapped the edit button. I selected Spencer's name. Delete contact. The phone asked me to confirm. I tapped yes without hesitation. I selected Candace, my sister. The girl I used to share a room with. The girl who told me my dreams were stupid. Delete contact. Gone. I selected Harold and Bernice, the people who gave me life but refused to give me love unless I fit into their narrow box of expectations. Delete contact. The list was empty. I put the phone down on the table face down. I didn't need those numbers anymore. I didn't need their validation. I had built a family of my own. A family of friends, collaborators, and mentors who saw me for who I truly was. I stood up and walked to the railing of the terrace. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold. It looked just like the dress I wore that night. I closed my eyes and listened to the wind. Blood is a biological accident. It is simply a shared history of DNA. But family is different. Family is earned. Family is safety. Family is the people who clap for you when you win and hold you when you lose, not because they want something from you, but because they love you. Respect is the rent you pay to be in someone's life. My family stopped paying rent a long time ago, so I evicted them. And now, looking at this endless horizon, I finally understand. The empty space they left behind wasn't a hole. It was room for me to grow. I turned back to the studio. I had a melody in my head, a happy melody. It was time to write the next chapter. And this time, I was the only author. This story is a powerful reminder that sharing DNA does not grant anyone a license to disrespect you. Valerie's journey teaches us that true family is defined by loyalty and love, not by obligation or appearance. We often hold on to toxic relationships because we fear being alone. But as Valerie discovered, the greatest company you can keep is your own self-worth. Breaking free from people who drain you isn't an act of cruelty, it is a necessary act of survival. You cannot bloom in a garden where everyone is trying to block your sun. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. Share this video with someone who needs the courage to set boundaries today. Have you ever had to walk away from a family member to save your own peace? I want to hear your story in the comments below. Remember, you are the author of your life, and it is never too late to write a new ending. Thank you for listening.